the MiGs didn't like to operate in the vertical, which is a huge disadvantage for them, a great advantage for us. So MiGs on the other side of the circle making a level turn. I was able to cut across the circle, came up, fired 2 radar missiles, and the second of the 2 missiles dead center in the fuselage. Kill.
You are about to embark upon the great crusade
to meet this mounting aggression.
And make no mistake about it, good will prevail.
The reason I wanted to go to Vietnam so badly is I wanted to be a Thunderbird. And there was a requirement that one had to have a Vietnam tour before they could be considered for selection of the Thunderbird. So I immediately volunteered as a first lieutenant for Vietnam. And I initially had an assignment in the 104 to Vietnam, and it was later switched to the F4, which turned out to be better for me because the F4 was a much better combat airplane than the 104. The 104 was very, very limited in what it could do in combat. The F4 was bigger, a little bit faster, carried a lot more ordnance. It was more of a multi-purpose airplane. It did a lot of things. It didn't do any of them really well, but it did a lot of them pretty well. A lot of things. So it was, for those days, it was the most capable fighter airplane that we had. The MiG was superior in certain areas. It was hard to see. That was the most important part, because in an air battle, the airplane that loses sight of the other one first is going to lose the battle, right? Because you don't see the other guy, he's going to get you. So the fact that this thing is, compared to ours, is smaller, sleeker, silver, hard to see, and in the blue sky it was often real hard to see. It was quick, so that was a tremendous advantage. My first tour in Vietnam was 1968 at Da Nang. Arrived there on April Fool's Day, 1968. April 1st. I thought I had arrived in hell. We landed at Da Nang. It was already hot and humid, and opened the canopy, and the sewer ran right along the runway from the base sewer, sewage system. And it was hot and humid and smelled awful. And that smell and heat and humidity hit us in the face. And I thought, oh my God, I have landed in hell. You mean I got to do this for a year? There's no way. I was flying mainly air to ground, 750-pound bombs, rockets, strafe, and I started out mostly in targets in South Vietnam, and then I ended up flying a special mission called the Fast Fact mission, which we flew at low altitude and high speed, single ship over North Vietnam looking for targets. And when we found a good target, we would call in other airplanes and direct them on strikes against those targets. And it was called the Fast Fact, forward air controller. That normally took place in a slow-moving airplane in the south, where the forward air controller would be in touch with the ground commander, and they had targets on the ground, and flight of fighter airplanes would rendezvous with the forward air controller in the air, and the controller would describe the target on the ground and direct the strike. And so that concept was taken into North Vietnam, but the slow-moving, smaller airplanes couldn't survive the enemy threat over the north, the ground fire mostly. So they decided to do it in a jet, and it was called a jet fac or a fast fac. And the F-100s were the first to do it, and made quite a name for themselves, called Misties. And they flew out of Phuket in South Vietnam. And so we decided to transition into the Phantom with that mission. And I was selected, I volunteered for the first group and was selected and went and trained with the MiGs, did about a dozen rides in the backseat of the F-100 over North Vietnam. In an air fight, you have to think in 3 dimensions, and the arena is kind of an egg-shaped arena. And the reason that where an egg is bigger on the bottom and smaller on the top, that's because of G-forces. So let's say we're diving at the ground and we're pulling up at the bottom of the egg. We're fighting in the side of this egg in space, theoretically. So as you pull at the bottom, the G-forces are acting against you, so the curve is bigger. As you come over the top, G-force is helping you, so the curve over the top is smaller. So one has to learn to picture the fight is taking place inside of a giant egg in space, and to use gravity to help, to assist. And so that is the fundamental arena that we fight in. And then there are many other things to consider, but that concept is important.
And now a quick message about our partner NordVPN. Without support like theirs, we couldn't bring you weekly stories from our battlefield heroes. NordVPN is here to help you navigate the internet minefield where cyber warfare is fought every second, and you are the target. NordVPN provides you with a military-grade encrypted connection to the internet, keeping your data and online activity safe from hackers and other third parties. They even have threat protection where it scans your files before you download them, identifies threats, and blocks them before they can harm your device. You can change your virtual location with a click to access blocked websites and content that uses geographic restrictions. Even places like Netflix limit what movies you can watch based on where you live. Different countries see different movies. So choose from servers in 59 different countries to keep your location and data anonymous. Get our exclusive deal at nordvpn.com/avc and get 4 months free on 2-year subscription. It's risk-free with a 30-day money-back guarantee. And now, back to our story.
After the first tour, I came back to Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, went through our fighter weapons school, which is the same as Top Gun. And then I stayed there as an instructor for 2 more years, and then volunteered for my second tour. Went back to the second tour in '72. First kill 10 May '72. Now Roger was shot down on that first mission, 10 May. And that's why that mission was bittersweet, because it was good to get a victory. But one of our best guys, Bob Lodge, was in the front seat. He was a classmate of mine, fighter weapons school graduate. And he already had a couple of MiGs under his belt. It was his 3rd combat tour, and that was my first at the time. They were considered the best, the finest air crew in Southeast Asia. But unfortunately, that day, Bob was shot down. And so Bob had always said that he would never bail out, because he had a lot of special intelligence knowledge that none of the rest of us had. One of the reasons, because he was so smart. He had been promoted to major 2 years below the zone, so he was a major. The rest of us were captains. So Bob had a lot of specialized knowledge, and he had always said he would never bail out. He always advised us. He said, if you're hit, fly the airplane till it quits flying and then bail out. He said, now, I'm not going to bail out. I'm not telling you what to do. He said, you fly the airplane, and when it quits flying, you bail out. So sure enough, that day, Bob had downed a MiG head-on. I had downed a MiG head-on. No, we had converted after that head-on pass where Bob and Roger had downed a MiG. We converted into the rear quarter of the remaining airplanes. I got one of them. Bob was going after the remaining MiG when a flight of MiG-19s high and behind appeared out of nowhere And I saw them, and I began to call for Bob to brake. Brake means a hard turn. And he didn't hear us, didn't pay any attention to us, whatever it was. And they came up behind him and shot him down with 20-millimeter fire. You could see the bullets hitting the airplane. The airplane rolled upside down. We're screaming, bail out, bail out, bail out. And Bob told Roger Locker to get out, and he said, oh no. Bob said, you can bail out if you want to. I'm not going to bail out. And he went in with the airplane. The reason was he had this special knowledge, and he felt that if they captured him, he would be very badly tortured for the information that he had, for the intelligence information that he knew. So it was really a tough call. It was hard. When you lose somebody, particularly a friend, the whole thing is difficult. Probably the best thing to do is to go fly right away again, rather than to sit and think about it. So, and that was the policy. That was what we tried to get everybody to do. So when there was something like that happen, we encouraged people to go ahead and fly again the next day, and try to put it into perspective and keep it from affecting your performance. You know, it's hard though. It's hard to put it out of your mind. Although I think most of us were able to do it in a way that we could continue to fly, but the harder parts were when we were back on the ground, and then you had time to think. In the air, you don't have time to think about a bunch of things other than what's going on. If I flew, I wanted to be first in, because whoever's first in has got the best chance of engaging with the MiGs. The later airplanes that went in, particularly the last flight of 4, and these are what we call, these are the air-to-air flights. Our job is to protect the strike force and the other airplanes, the chaff force, from attack from enemy airplanes. So our job is not air to ground, it is strictly air to air. And we would have an ingress flight, and then we would have flights to come in during the mission, and then we'd have an egress flight. An egress flight came in near the end of the mission in case there are people in the beginning of the mission that are coming out and they're in trouble and they need help. That was the purpose of the egress flight. Well, the egress flight hardly got any of the action. Most of the action was at the beginning of the mission. Well, hell, if I had to be there and fly combat in Vietnam, I wanted to be where the friggin' action was. I didn't want to be Taily and Charlie. So the schedulers had scheduled me to fly egress, to lead the egress flight. I said, what the hell is this? And so I'm bitching and moaning about being scheduled. And as it turns out, had I been on the ingress flight, I wouldn't have had a chance to engage these MiGs, because this whole thing happened toward the end of the mission. And I was there at the right time, at the right place, and was able to get the victory. So after all of my complaining and carrying on about my position in the flight, I ended up being in the right place at the right time. So you just never know what's going to happen. And the best we can do is be there, work as hard as we can, be as prepared as possible, and roll with the punches. I downed the first MiG in that flight of 4 MiG-21s with the Sparrow missile. I think it was the second of 2. The second MiG was all the way across the circle. This happens in a great big circle with the egg that I was telling you about. And so I had downed the MiG on one side of the egg. The other MiG was on the other side. And So what I did is really back to the basic training. As I did a dive to the bottom part of the egg across the circle. Now, the one thing that made this doable is that the MiGs didn't like to operate in the vertical, which is really where the fight is won in the air combat. It's in the vertical. So they basically made level turns, which is a huge disadvantage for them, a great advantage for us. So MiGs on the other side of the circle making a level turn. I was able to cut across the circle. Otherwise, now I'd have never made it going around the outside of the circle. But I cut across the circle, came up like so, fired 2 radar missiles, and the second of the 2 missiles, which were my last 2, dead center in the fuselage. Kill. Well, I think anybody who flies a fighter airplane in air combat, the ultimate is to shoot down an enemy airplane, and then after that, 5 is a historical designation that's, that's pretty significant. So, yes, anybody in this business would want to become a fighter ace, and yet it's very hard to do. It's very unlikely, and I feel incredibly fortunate to have been in the position where I had the chance. And then the odds were greatly against it happening. The odds were much more in favor of being killed or captured. And so not to be killed, not to be captured, and to become a fighter ace, and the only one in the Air Force, and the last one probably in history ever, in the history of air warfare ever, probably the last one. I mean, it's been 50 years. So I feel, well, why me? Why did the universe pick me? I don't know. But I'm happy to take it and proud of it.